Good morning. My name is Matt Wilmot, and I am a shareholder with Schwabe, Williamson & Wyatt. Schwabe is a Pacific Northwest regional law firm having offices throughout the Northwest, including one right here in Bend. I would like to remind people that we are giving away a free GoPro camera to the winner of our trivia contest. So we have a table out in front, so please remember to submit an entry for that. I am very pleased to have the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker today. I'm also very proud of our firm's long-term involvement with BVC and EDCO. We are a title sponsor of BVC, and we have been for many years. I am privileged to serve as an EDCO Platinum board member, and both myself and other members of our firm have, for a long time, supported EDCO's stable of experts, and also as well as Founders Pad. In addition, we have the great privilege of representing, and have for many years, the BVC investor group charged with selecting the winning company in BVC. I have been attending BVC since 2009, and it truly does get bigger and better every year, and this year is no different. So kudos to the EDCO team for all of the hard work that they do in putting on such a great event. So now on to the keynote. I'm not giving it. I am privileged to have the honor of introducing today's keynote speaker, Dr. Steve Sliwa. Steve joined In Situ as the fourth employee of the startup company and served as CEO from 2002 through early 2011. In Situ develops an unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, for military and civilian applications and executes a thriving business model delivering intelligence through turnkey solutions. During Steve's time at In Situ, he grew the company from 4 to over 800 employees and $450 million in revenue. While there, In Situ maintained a 90% market share within its niche with customers and operations throughout the world. Prior to In Situ, Steve had a varied career that included serving as a research manager at NASA, founder of an educational software company, VP of product development for a public Silicon Valley engineering software company, and president of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. After In Situ was sold to Boeing in 2008, Steve embarked upon his next adventure. He went right back to his roots and founded another customer-focused lean startup company with other serial entrepreneurs, this time in the big data space at Seek. Seek is founded on the premise that companies need better solutions for quickly and easily deriving business insight from their industrial process data. The company is based in Seattle and is funded and backed by a powerhouse group of investors that are committed to bringing Seek's visionary solutions to market. Just last month, Steve was appointed to the governing board of the Oregon Institute of Technology, or OIT. The new 9-member board was confirmed by Governor Kitzhaber as part of an historic change in higher education governance in Oregon. Steve holds engineering degrees from Princeton, George Washington, and Stanford universities, and a business degree from Stanford. He resides in White Salmon, Washington with his wife Nancy and enjoys flying his motor glider and TBM turboprop airplane. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Steve Sliwa.
Thanks. Okay. This one goes forward. Okay, is this working? Sounds like it is. Well, this has been a great organization. I enjoyed the networking reception last night and all the coordination that I had with the BVC, and they gave me this mission. Come up with something that could motivate current and future entrepreneurs, educate, maybe some lessons learned for entrepreneuring, collaborate, do some questions and answers, but they really stressed the execute part, get done in time for lunch. So I'm going to try to accomplish all those goals in my talk today. And what I want to do is do a little bit of background on In Situ and its products and capabilities, go into some anecdotes that we had along the way. It will imply some lessons learned. Talk a little bit about entrepreneuring in rural areas. And then for my education mission, I'm going to pick out a couple of leadership insights and share that. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers with the group. So let's talk a little bit about the background. So we were a leading provider at In Situ of UAS, unmanned aerial systems, UAVs, unmanned uninhabited aerial vehicles, or as the press called them, drones. We don't tend to like the word drone, but we lost that battle with the media, so everybody says drones now. But our most popular system is something called Scan Eagle, and it has well over 800,000 hours of flight time. It's the fourth most in the fleet history. And it's the only vehicle in the top 15 of the vehicles being used that was developed in an entrepreneurial commercial environment. Everything else was done within the military. And we took advantage of the big push on the military side that was happening in the 2000s, and we had operations throughout the US and the world, and had a high, very fast growth rate, as you can see here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned along that way. Turns out that before I arrived, my classmate that founded the business, using SBIR funds, Small Business Innovation Research grants from the government, developed the first generation UAV and flew it across the Atlantic Ocean and was the first one to do that. It took 28 hours and burned 1.5 gallons of gas. And what really made the press pretty good is that the military had announced that they were going to fly their billion-dollar device across the Atlantic Ocean for the Paris Air Show, and they got done only 2 weeks after us. So a lot of people had some good press about David and Goliath. And that's what I inherited when I came and joined in 2001. And we actually started to focus on using UAVs for helping with fishing. In the tuna market at the time, lots of rules that limit your catch, and so the speed with which you can do the catch ends up having a big impact on your costs. And being able to spot the tuna would be a good way to do it. It'd be out there where there aren't other airplanes, it'd be safety, all of that sort of stuff. And we were busy trying to raise funds, but we were just having trouble because that time was just coming off of the dot-bomb era, and so the investment capital was low. So in 2001, we started having conversations with Boeing to talk about ways where we might be able to team up together, and then 9/11 happened. And actually, they became very interested in trying to figure out how to do this. The investors at the time that we had were nervous about robotic airplanes, tuna, how do we manage that? And Boeing didn't have enough capital for this particular project, given all the other things they were doing. So we actually worked out a joint deal. If Boeing would put in some initial money as an R&D contract, which they know how to do, but didn't take the IP rights, we would go in with our venture capital friends and raise 2-to-1 money for any dollar they would put in as investment capital. Boeing's like, what? You get investors to put money onto an R&D project? We've never done that before. But one of the key aspects of that is that we gave them the marketing rights, which was actually good because as a small company, you want somebody there opening the doors and introducing you to potential customers. So it actually worked out as a good deal, nice triangle problem, where the investors were able to put in some money but have confidence that Boeing would help manage the technology. Boeing would get some extra investment capital, and we would get a sales force as well as investment capital for moving forward. So that worked out. In 2003, we started doing some demos. 2004, we actually had our first deployment, and we actually arrived just in time for the Battle of Fallujah, which is the biggest battle that we've had since Vietnam. And I'll tell you that the general officers estimate that we probably had 30% less casualties as a result of our product being there. So that was a nice opportunity for us. Then we grew into other sorts of things. We added customers every year, and it just kept on growing from there. In order to scale up, we did additional rounds of funding and ultimately raised about $50 million. And in 2008, we actually were acquired through a bidding process by Boeing and became a full-time company within them. But because Boeing was really excited about all the innovation we were doing, we were the first company they brought into Boeing Defense that they didn't fully integrate. And to this day, In Situ employees still have their own badge, they still operate independently, and their Boeing officers are actually on the board of directors, but all of the company is still an independent company. And the idea is to be able to leverage the benefits of a small business with that of a large business and really deliver value to the customers. And that's still going on now. Now, as we built In Situ, we really worked hard on our company culture. And just like in the Bend area and the Gorge area, we're pretty proud of our lifestyle environment. And we actually use that lifestyle environment as kind of a leveraging point for how we built the company. And we believed in the idea of lifestyle entrepreneurs. And those are people that are there for a reason, for a purpose. They work hard, but they play hard. And we recruited hard to make that the case for who we brought in. That kind of flows right into dedicated toward customer success. And so we built that right into our culture from the get-go, that customer success was going to be really important. That culture and teamwork for achieving that, culture of teamwork and collaboration was really important as we grew. We made sure that every employee had an ownership stake, receptionist as well, and a profit-sharing plan as we grew the company. So everybody was committed. It was a huge difference for us when we started going on certain parts of our business plan, is that our employees were always more motivated, worked harder, were more committed to achieving success than anyone around us, and that led us an opportunity to break out. And then we also made sure that we were having fun while we were doing it, and that fit with the whole lifestyle company. And in the military, around here it's obvious to say you would be a dog-friendly workplace. The military, that was like unheard of. And we would have 3-star generals coming in to visit us and want to see the dogs, because they had heard about the dogs at this aerospace company that was in the Gorge. And I can tell you for a fact that if you're going through a ITAR audit with some older ladies who are like going through every little detail, if you ask them to hold the puppy while you go out of the room, you come back in, the total environment has changed, and it makes it a lot easier to get through those audits. So we use everything we can to our advantage. Here's one of our employees testing out aerodynamics on the Gorge. And as I mentioned previously, getting up to $450 million in a few years, we had a lot of growth awards, and here's a few of them that were mentioned. And it's kind of interesting that the way we grew ended up being different than the way we anticipated when we built our initial business models. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go. So let me talk a little bit about the products and the technologies. So in addition to the drones, or unmanned aircraft, there was the launchers, the retrievers, the ground control stations, and the services. What was a little bit shocking to me was that when we were fully scaled, we were only getting 22% of our revenue from the drones. The rest was coming from all the other things that were packaged in. And that was something that we hadn't planned on. And in particular, services, as I'll describe in a little bit. Here's the particular ScanEagle device. It weighs about 40 pounds, has a 10-foot wingspan, and has about a 24-hour endurance. So it can stay up and monitor things. It carries cameras. We did a lot of technology things to improve here. Those are buzzwords that are important to some of our customers. And we also were able to operate from ships. Now, one of the interesting things about having robotic airplanes is you really get to have fun and play with things. So I'm going to show you our first research flight from our research vessel. So here is the Shackleton, which is a vessel that we rented in the Puget Sound. And I have a little video here. And there's the launch going forward. So launching from a ship isn't so hard. It's getting captured onto it. And here we come toward the skyhook. And it just recovered onto the skyhook apparatus. I'll describe it in a minute, but first here's a UAV view.
10 seconds.
Now, you can't quite hear it, but there's the computers counting down.
5 seconds.
5 seconds.
3, 2, 1.
And once it captures, it comes off. So that was one of our inventions. What happens there is you have hooks on the wing. You fly into a rope. If the rope hits here, that causes the airplane to slide. Then the rope slides down, and the rope mountain climber's hook grabs hold of the rope, and then it just sits there and hangs there. And the great thing is that we're able to land on a ship without aiming at the ship, which makes it easier to get certified with the Navy, because you come in there with this robotic airplane and tell them, we want to land on your ship, and they're saying, no way, you're aiming that thing at me. So after doing these experiments, we were able to actually go off, and it wasn't probably within a couple years afterwards, we started getting on all these other ships. So these are all the other ships that we ultimately got onto by 2008. So it's kind of fun to be able to go out there, play with some robotic airplanes, do some experiments, and the next thing you know, you can be out there delivering value. In fact, let's see, does this one come on? Actually, here's a couple of others. So we went from the little research things, now these are... That's a civilian mission. We left the wind sounds in so it'd be realistic, and of course, being from the gorge, we like the wind. And it's evening, it had the lights on. One good thing is because it's all GPS derived, we don't have to see the rope. We're actually maneuvering to a point, related to the GPS thing. There's one that's landing at night. Engine shuts off automatically, it just hangs there. And this is one of our civilian missions.
Got it. Yay!
They're a little bit less formal than the military. So then shortly, around 2007, we decided that we would try to expand into other areas and have other products, and we developed a product specifically aimed for military applications that we called the integrator, which allowed us to integrate a lot of high-tech types of devices and apparatus into it. And as we came out with that device and something called a program of record started to come up, that's when industry got really excited about what we were doing, all of our growth, and an auction went off, and we ended up selling to Boeing at a very good return. So those of you that are in the industry for exchanges, we ended up going for 99 times EBITDA, which is a pretty good number and in that industry. And so we took advantage of our little hype cycle. So small UAV applications, there's a lot of military ones that are mentioned here. But as you know now, there's an incredible number of civilian missions that are out there. And working together with the FAA, hopefully there'll be an opportunity where we can start monitoring these. One of my favorite ones that we worked on and are now finally getting able to pursue with the FAA has to do with whales off of Alaska. Turns out that you want to develop the oil fields a couple hundred miles out off the coast where it'd be safer in case there's any kind of issues with the environment. And to search for the oil out there, you use these seismic sensors that interfere with the whales. And so fortunately, the oil companies have invented these bubble noisemakers that scare the whales away. So one part of the federal government's happy because the whales are being protected. Unfortunately, another side of the federal government signed contracts with the Inuit Indians that said that they can harvest 2 whales per year per village. And so if they're being scared too far away, they can't harvest their whales for their rituals. So what they really needed was a device that could monitor where the whales are so the bubbles would be made just big enough so they would go around the seismic testing but not so far away that the Inuit Indians couldn't have their rituals. And so that's where we got involved, and that's an example of, again, where a robotic device where it's unsafe can go out there 24 hours at a time and track where the whales are going. But this area will continue to develop. So let me talk a little bit about some of our key factors in success. We had great technology. Imaging systems kept getting better and better. When we first released our first night sensor, it seemed like you could hardly tell if there was anything there. By the time 2011 came along, you could probably count the buttons on the shirt from a half mile away. Can't see the UAV. We had an integrated operating software, very friendly. The military would always keep on trying to come up with a standard. They would write a standard and try and tell us that we would have to fly that standard. Whenever I would have an admiral sit down and try our software, eventually they'd say, let's change it to this, because we had a very civilian-based approach. The launch and recovery innovation. I mentioned our strategic alliance with Boeing. When we first started the business, there were about 400 drone companies kind of in our space, and we were the first ones to kind of do a joint venture with a big company. When that initially happened, people accused us of being traitors, going with the big companies. Within 12 months, they were all trying to get joint ventures going. All the big companies tried to do it. Every single one of them signed at least one, but ours is the only one that actually survived the test of time. And part of that was that we had people that used to be in big companies, so we knew how we could work together. It's hard for a big company and a small company to work together on innovative things. But we made it work, and it allowed us to get our VC investment in. We had a company culture focused on customer success. We would not let a customer fail. Any employee in our company knew, no matter where they were, when they were deployed, whatever expense would be justified, and you wouldn't have to worry about being in trouble if you made that expense, if it was to make a customer successful. And it actually became well known throughout our customer set. Initially, it was the military, and they would talk about the fact that In Situ would never let us down. And it was never about the money, it was always about making us successful. Then one of the things that I think is one of the most important ones is we had a different business model than everybody else. Everybody else was trying to sell drones, and we figured out they didn't really want the drones. What they really wanted was the information. And they really didn't want to have to go through the training and the operation things and all this, and they were busy. So we actually decided to say, we'll sell you pixel hours. So we didn't get paid when we built our UAV. We didn't get paid when we trained our people. We didn't get paid when we shipped over. We didn't get paid when we took off. We started getting paid. The clock would go off when we got within 10 kilometers of the first assigned mission point. And as long as we kept flying and delivering video that the customer wanted, we would keep earning money. How's that motivation for improving your product? If we find out that, the night sensor is overheating and it's not so good, they don't want to use it anymore, how long does it take us to improve that? Like days? Even with satellite phone connections drop down. So we were constantly improving our product. And in fact, during the first 4 years that we had ScanEagle in the field, we estimated that we made 223 major improvements to the product. If that was a government-derived program, it probably would have been 3. So that's what happens when you can create a fully performance-based contract. And in fact, we were given the permission to build a lemonade stand in the desert. We got the franchise for doing that, and it happened to be really hot out there, and they wanted a lot of lemonade. So let me give you an example. So we first shipped out, and we were kind of like the general science fair project, and a unit, say a 12-person unit with a sergeant, about ready to go out, and their mission for that night is to go to a warehouse and remove all the weapons. And they said, okay, we want you to take this science fair project called ScanEagle with you. You just carry a laptop, and it could help you. He says, we don't have time for that kind of stuff. He says, no, you really need to take it. The old man, the general, really would like you to do it. He says, this is a dangerous mission. We can't be spending time taking technology with us. I say, well, just all you have to do is carry the laptop and let the old man know what you think. So they go on the mission. They're in there taking out the weapons from the warehouse, and they look at the video, and suddenly there's about 40 insurgents gathering up to plan an ambush. And they're looking at them, and they're starting to come around this way, so they grab the weapons and go around the other way. No confrontation, everybody gets home. So that was a nice mission. 2 days later, they asked that sergeant to say, hey, there's a warehouse over here, could you go remove the weapons? They said, okay, well, where's ScanEagle? So, well, we don't have that for you today. Well, we're not going. What do you mean you're not going? You used to always go. Well, we used to do things without armor too, but once we've learned, we don't do that anymore. I said, well, I don't know if we have enough money for that. Well, if you're an officer worth your merit, you'll go find the money to order from that lemonade stand, because we're not going again without it. And in fact, we got in a situation where, like Canada had a rule, you couldn't leave outside the fence unless there was a ScanEagle overhead supporting your patrol. So that lemonade stand just became really popular. And it was easy because all they had to do is order for success. Just buy the part that they want. They didn't have to learn to operate it. They didn't have to do any part of it. All my colleagues in the industry were trying to sell UAVs, and frequently they would have problems, break down, and just, frustration. So by having that service, that really made a big difference. This one's a little bit embarrassing on me. So after our first ship deployment, turns out the ship went over to Somalia, and there were to help with the pirate problem. And they were supposed to be there for 6 months, and they'd done a bunch of other missions, and we were all excited, and it was really good, and we were getting all sorts of kudos. And they said, we're going to extend for another month because we really need them in Somalia, and even though we don't normally do that, we're going to extend for another month. And we got a call from the government saying, we need another system to go out right when the ship comes back, because we've got to go back to Somalia. And I said, well, okay, but that normally takes us like 6 months. I mean, normally, when you order things like this, it takes you 18 months, and we'll do it in 6 months. No, we need it in 6 weeks. I said, well, I don't know if we can do that. Well, you got to try to make it happen. It's important. And what happened was we did it, but on the road over across the Atlantic, we did a couple test flights, because normally you do that before you go, and we lost 2 UAVs. We usually send 10. And we figured out that they had taken the wrong fuel. And so they needed to have a 50-gallon barrel, which lasts for 1 month. And the captain said, that's okay, every 45 days we go to port, so the next time we go to port, we'll pick up one of those drums and we can start using ScanEagle. And the Navy said, no, you don't seem to understand. The only reason why you're going is because of ScanEagle. So they dispatched the Ronald Reagan Aircraft Carrier Group to come and deliver a 50-gallon drum. Now, what was the embarrassing part? I didn't charge enough for that mission. And the reason why the Navy wanted it so bad was that the Somali pirates that were kidnapping and hijacking the boats and stuff, the Navy wanted to support that mission, and they did their high-tech helicopters with their standoff equipment, and they could somehow detect the helicopter, and so their behavior would change. So then they brought in their high-tech P8 or P3s and tried to track the pirates, but the pirates knew the P3 was there, and their behavior would change. And how did they know the behavior was changed? Because the ScanEagle was over them 24/7, and they didn't know it. So they had to have the ScanEagle in order to be able to map all those behaviors. And anybody who's seen the movie Captain Phillips, that's ScanEagle. In fact, there's a couple shots of ScanEagle if you know what to look for, and we provided all the video surveillance that helped support that mission. So I have one more example I wanted to cover, and that is, and as an engineer, you're sitting there working on stuff, and you get feedback from the military, and you think that's pretty good. And the business is starting to grow, and all that's good, and just a bunch of engineers working hard in the gorge. And this kind of put things in perspective for me. At this time, we had a new headquarters building, didn't really have our name on it. Somehow this woman found out we were there, and she banged on the front door, and came in and insisted on wanting to see the president. And so I got a call back to my office. I normally have open door policy, and they said, but she seems pretty agitated. I don't know if you really want to meet with her. And I said, well, I'll meet with her. And he said, well, do you want us to get security over here? And I said, no, I'll handle it. So I come out there and I meet with her, and she said that, okay, I need to tell you something. Okay, what would you like to tell me? I said, well, my son's in the Marines. 2 nights ago, he was out on a mission. They were surrounded. It was terrible. It was a firefight. ScanEagle came. By the way, they renamed it. They call it Guardian Angel. Came, and they were able to find a way, and everybody got home as a result of that. And they found out that ScanEagle was made in the hometown of this Marine, and so they celebrated with him for that. She had just gotten a call. She was coming there and says, I need to hug people. I'm going to start with you, but I need a long line of people to hug because my son's coming home because of you. So as an engineer, it doesn't get much better than that in terms of putting things in perspective for you. But all successful ventures must embrace the obvious thing, which is luck. We had a path that looked pretty looked like it was pretty solid, but I'm telling you, it had some really rough spots. And when I look back on it, I can't believe how amazingly lucky we were in a couple of things. So what I like to do is take a couple of anecdotes and share those with you. So the 2 I picked out here, Webster Field Demo 1 is the first one I'm going to talk about. It turns out that there's this air show they were doing at Webster Field back in the early days where they would invite like 10 or 12 UAVs to come and do a little air show, and they would invite some of the people in Washington to come and see that. And after we signed our agreement with Boeing, none of Boeing's UAVs were flying. None of them were working. And the vice president for UAVs said that we'll bring us something there. And so they said, in situ, you're going to represent us. And we're going, but we only have 50 hours flying our UAV. Well, that's 49 hours better than what anyone else has, and you're going to have to go. But this is a public display, 50 hours. We don't really want to do that. They said, look, it's only going to be about 200 to 400 people, 200 of them. Most of them are going to be people that already know what's going on in the industry, so you don't really have to worry about that. Okay, so we had to go. Well, when we get there, they're having dress rehearsals. Now, one of the problems that we found out is that they told us that, look, because it's 12 UAVs scheduled, absolutely everybody has to be able to take off within seconds of the time that we tell you to take off and land within seconds of the time that we tell you to land. Otherwise, everything falls apart. And if anybody is off by more than a minute, we'll probably have to tar and feather you because that's just totally unacceptable. Does everybody understand that? And we're sitting there saying, yes, sir. Now, with our research devices, the closest that we'd been able to launch to the time that we've scheduled was 45 minutes. We're like the old days in the space race, right? T-minus 14 seconds on holding, forever. And we were sitting there, what? So the first day goes, and unbelievably, we launch within 4 minutes of the scheduled time. Now, we're going like, yeah, an order of magnitude improvement. But when we were doing the debriefing, the operations officer told our operations person, okay, hey, look, Scan Eagle was 4 minutes late. Obviously, there was something wrong with my phone or walkie-talkie or something. I apologize that you didn't get the message because nobody would ever launch 4 minutes late, and stuff like that. Oh, well, okay, sir. And we're like, so we dodged a bullet on that. But, there was a few issues. We got the other things fixed out. And then disaster happened on dress rehearsal number 2. And that was everything worked perfectly. You got to understand, now that we're at 50 hours and 20 minutes of flying time, we hadn't had 2 flights be the same in a row yet. So we're going like, how can this be? How can we possibly survive this? So we're saying, well, this doesn't look so good. So then we arrive at the air show, and it turns out 4,000 people showed up. We're sitting there in the morning, and they're getting ready to do that. We're scheduled to go right before the keynote speaker, who's the Assistant Secretary of the Homeland Security. There's congressional staff. There's the head of OSD's leader. There's people all over there. And I have Boeing people coming up to me saying, like, aren't you glad we made you go? I'm like, what? And my head of marketing and sales was responsible for being with the color commentator. And he had to be, he was going to be there saying, like, wow, look at that launch. And then he could say, yes, it's climbing out at 500 feet a minute. Or, notice the cartwheel didn't go very far and the fire is very well contained, I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, at this point, So we're trying to keep track of that. So we're getting closer and closer, and it's getting close to the thing. And at the 5-minute point before the launch, when we're scheduled to go, just before the keynote speaker, I look over and I see this. That person is my former college roommate, our chief scientist, and I know that because he's up there, that antenna system has just failed. And it takes 10 minutes to reboot and realign, and he's up there trying to figure out what to do because we got to go. So people are saying, aren't you excited? And I'm going like, my heart's pumping like this. Now, he recovered like a good chief scientist. He apparently saw the show that had somebody called Vanna White. So he held onto the antenna, and he just like pointed it as the UAV went flying around. Now, this is over there. Only we knew that was going on while this was going on. So my heart's pumping. We're up there doing our little maneuvers and stuff, and suddenly the Navy system has an emergency, and they want us to land short. Now, we're scheduled for an 11-minute show, but it's a little bit like figure skating, where you got everything exactly worked out what you're going to do, and they say, okay, you have to land now. What? And then on top of that, the wind suddenly shifted, and now there was a crosswind, and we'd never done a crosswind landing before. And we have 4,000 people in front of us, and I'm going to show you what happened. So here we are coming in, 4,000 people off to the right. We're aiming right for it. There's the thing. There's the scientist sitting on top of it. Boom, we come in. It lands, and unbelievably, 4,000 people stood up and gave a standing ovation. I've never seen it in the air show before, and I haven't seen it since. And, somehow we managed to get through that. And it turns out the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security 3 months later became the Secretary of Navy. Guess who had to approve our first big contract? The John Young became the Assistant Secretary of Navy. He's the one that had to operationalize it. Then he became the head of all of procurement for the DoD. So if we hadn't gone, and if we hadn't survived this, all these things wouldn't have lined up. And we didn't plan it. It just sort of happened, and we managed to somehow, by the skin of our teeth, get through. So let me do one more. On that list, I mentioned there was the head of OSD, stands for Office of Secretary of Defense, UAS, Unmanned Aerial Systems Leader, nominated us to participate in an experiment called Forward Look. So now we're up to about 75 hours on our airplane. And we're going like, we don't want to go to a military operation when we only have 75 hours. No, you have to go. In fact, they're going to have 4 UAVs learn how to work together. And so we did a bunch of technology, worked with things, whatever, and we got there and we're setting up. And as we got there, they told us the test plan is we're going to spend 4 days collecting metrics and 1 day doing collaboration testing. And we said, okay, what do you mean by metrics? Well, with metrics, what we're going to do is we're going to upload 10 targets to you once you're in the air, and you've got 30 minutes to try and find them. You can't possibly find them all in 30 minutes, but we'll see how many you find, if you correctly identify them, and what your geolocation accuracy is. And we said, metrics? This sounds a little bit like a competition. And they said, well, yeah, we are the home team. We do believe in the Predator. We don't believe in small UAVs. We've been trying to convince those guys in DoD they shouldn't worry about small UAVs anymore and put all their money with us. But anyway, we'll collect some metrics and do stuff. And think of it as more of a friendly competition. So our heart's pumping. Now, little background. The Predator is the gold standard, right? I mean, it's unbelievable how good that UAV is. It was the one that was first out there. I mean, it was so scary that we'd have to fly against it in a competition when we weren't even, they didn't even warn us. And one of the things that happened is that just 3 days before we went, we invented something. And we had no idea what this competition was going to be, so I'm going to show you a little bit about what that is. So here we are flying around a fire tower, lookout tower, and in there might be somebody that's aiming a weapon. Can you see that? No, I can't see that. But if you're flying a half mile away so you can't hear or see us, this is what it looks like when you're sitting there with a small UAV trying to look at that. You see, it's not all that good. Clearly, you can't tell if somebody's got a weapon, right? Okay, so now let's zoom in. That camera, that was with a no zoom. Now let's zoom in 30:1. And now you start to see details, but it's like that whole binocular problem. How do you sit there and see what's going on? This is what we were getting ready to go down to that military test with. And so it turns out, not knowing what the test was, but just for the fun of it, an engineer came into my cubicle and said, hey, look, I just invented something. I've been working on this. I think it's going to work. You might want to take it with you when you go down to Arizona. I call it object tracker. So remember, I've been working on this? I said, yeah, well, let's take a look at it. So he says, well, what it does is if you turn it on, it feeds it back, and that's what it looks like. Is there somebody aiming a weapon in that tower? Could you tell? Yeah. So I said, okay, well, I don't know if we'll need it, but we'll take it with us just in case. And so we end up going to this mission where we go and we have to fly our first mission. And it was a little bit scary because we go out there, we don't know what to expect. We go up to the IP point, they give us our 10 targets, and we go and try and find the first one, and then we go and try and get the second one, and we're in there, and then everybody's going around the place. We've never done a target before. And lo and behold, we get all 10 targets done in 28 minutes. And we're going, well, that's pretty good. So we go back and we go wait for a while until our next turn. Then we come back to the IP point. They give us 10 more targets. But this time we said, hey, instead of going back and forth and reaching across, why don't you just hold the thing here so I can see what to do and type it in? Oh, okay. So we streamlined it to 18 minutes the next time and 17 minutes. And they had a little bit harder set. So in fact, at the end of the day, we actually got all 40 targets in 72 minutes, had 100% correctly identified, and our geolocation accuracy was less than 50 meters. The Predator took 96 minutes to find 28 targets was 85% correct finding it, and their geolocation accuracy was greater than 200 meters. We found out what our purpose was. We didn't know it until we got there, but that's what we were designed to do. In fact, they came back and said, hey, we've been looking over the numbers, and we've decided that we don't need any more metrics. One day of metrics is enough. We can go and start working on collaboration. And we said, wait, you promised us 4 days of metrics. That's the promise. You got to keep your promise going. So, in fact, at one point, one of the UAVs couldn't fly, and they asked that UAV, hey, you couldn't fly, but do you know what your accuracy would be? And that person, who's no longer in marketing, said, well, it wouldn't be as good as a Scan Eagle, but it might be as good as a Predator. So in one day, we became the gold standard for this mission. We didn't know that was going to happen, but it turns out that's what we were designed for. So anyway, we've had some examples of luck, and there's a proverb, luck is where, preparation meets opportunity. And there's a bunch of similar ones. I particularly like the one up there on the left with Thomas Jefferson. I'm a great believer in luck. In fact, the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get. And I think that's one of the key parts for an entrepreneur. So I like to show this as a picture of our luck trajectory. This is the team on the left. This is the one that we had when we signed up Boeing and started our journey. And this is what it looked like when we sold to Boeing a little bit later. So we ended up having a really great team and had great success and fun doing it. Okay, what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about entrepreneuring in rural areas, since we share that in common. And clearly, economic development in most areas, focus on trying to lure large enterprises there. But in reality, entrepreneurial businesses have a lot of the job growth. And so that's a really important part. That's one of the things that Ben does, one of the things we've been trying to do in the Gorge. And but one of the things that comes out is when you do these entrepreneurial businesses that grow and so forth, is you actually build a supplier network around you. And with In Situ in the Gorge now, there's probably about 15 companies where the majority of their income comes from In Situ and have grown up. And so while In Situ had about 800 employees, it was probably about 1,600 total in the Gorge, plus all the other suppliers we had out of the Gorge that were involved with helping In Situ grow. One of the things is even the service providers have little stories and little plaques held up saying, here's where In Situ signed a certain deal, here's where an admiral came for this one, and stuff. So they take a lot of pride in the fact that they actually help the entrepreneurial businesses grow. And in fact, that ends up being, in my mind, one of the big benefits in general. Now, the challenges are, the three biggest ones for me are recruiting, and I call it the two-body problem. That's related to physics, but basically, if you're trying to recruit somebody who's outstanding, generally they have a partner, and trying to find a job for that partner so they can feel comfortable moving, that's a real challenge. The second thing is access to funding. Clearly, if you're in certain environments, there's a lot more funding going around, so it's easier to at least be introduced to it. That's what we're doing today. We're trying to address that, and that's one of the key solutions. And another one's, when this business starts to scale, it's the facilities flexibility. We had a real challenge as we were growing. We just didn't have enough facilities in the Gorge. At one point, we had 27 buildings spread over a 60-mile up and down the Gorge in order to try and find space. Anytime, if you had an office in your house, we probably would have tried to rent it. That's how anxious we were. And of course, when you're in a big city, you just go from one building to another typically, and so that's one of the big challenges. Sometimes when I talk about the challenges of a rural area, people ask me, well, what are the benefits? Well, here we know it. You get a bonded lifestyle with entrepreneurs. The people that you bring in are there for a reason, not only for the job, but they're there because that's where they want to be. And so you have less turnover, you have more commitment. Quality of life is great places to raise families, affordable housing, the strong commitment, lower turnover, and to reinforce it from people to Seattle, this Little League is only 10 minutes away. And they can resonate with that, believe me. Community support, as I mentioned, the community comes together and supports you like you don't get in a big city and can help get things done. I mentioned about the restaurants. I remember we had some big official that was asking about some bottle of wine and that he really wanted to be able to take home. He said, well, it's not really legal, but on top of that, that was my last bottle. and he ended up finding one in his wine cellar and ran out to the parking lot and stuck it in the guy's car. And he always brings that up to me whenever I see him about how cool the gorge is. So that's the kind of thing that you get that you don't normally get in another kind of environment. And the implication of that is customers and suppliers love coming to visit you. We are well known not just for the dogs, but we're also known for the fishing, too, because a lot of Marines would schedule a Thursday, Friday visit, and then we'd explain to them how to get their fishing fix in over the weekend. And also, for us, we had good access for drone flying. We were using the Boardman military range. And of course, here in this area, you're working with Warm Springs to be able to get that area up. And so that's something you can do in a rural area that you can't do in a city. And so this is one key benefit of our type of business that we were trying to grow. So solutions, the two-body problem. We worked on networking. We formed the Gorge Technology Alliance, which allowed us to network amongst the businesses. So if we had critical hires, we could work together on the spouses, significant others. Fortunately, in our case, once we grew big enough, we got teased a little bit, is that when we were out doing our recruiting, some people said that they said, okay, we'd really like to hire you. What does your significant other do? And they said, oh, I don't have one. Okay, here's a list of skill areas that we need. When you find somebody that matches to one of these skill areas, give us a call, and we'll complete the deal. And so there's different ways to scale up. But anyway, clusters are things that worked really good. Fundraising, we worked really hard with the banks and the angel funds. We were lucky we could use Seattle and Portland. We ultimately got our mezzanine funding out of Silicon Valley. But I really love what we're doing here with the BVC and the activities, and so glad that Seven Peaks came here. Obviously, we need to keep working the facilities, and there's lots of things that we can do. You guys are doing a bunch of this too, but to help with the business plan coaching, the boot camps, and the mentorship. I think that's really important in the rural areas. Okay, so what I'd like to do is pick out two examples of leadership insights, and kind of when I go through, I used to teach a course in leadership and entrepreneurship in graduate school, and I've been expanding this list from things, and I'm going to pick out two to cover that I think are helpful to entrepreneurs. So one I call is the partnership pie model, and it just helps me explain to people how they should be thinking about an issue. And that is that everyone is concerned about how to maximize their piece of the pie. That's given. And it could be either from fundraising, it could be from doing some sort of joint activity or partnership, but you're trying to figure out what's in it for you to try to be able to do that. And what I point out is that a piece of pie is proportional to pi r squared times the angle. So it's the radius squared and the angle are two of the key parameters. And I just find it amazing that people spend a lot of time worrying about the angle. What's their percentage of ownership? When the biggest thing you should be worried about is trying to assess what's the r squared. Because r squared is going to grow a lot faster than the angle. And that's what you should be trading off. Let me give you an example, which I thought was going to be embarrassing for me, but it worked out, which is after we did our fundraising success, the attorneys that we use in Seattle sometimes ask me to be a reference for their future entrepreneurs. In this particular practice, what they do is they give you discounted rates and give you some extra services and introduce you to investors in return for having some warrants in your business. But typically, founder CEOs are very nervous about giving up any of that pie angle to attorneys. And so there's always a pushback, and they're always going through that. And so I told him how I was trying to help his future entrepreneurs get over that hump. And he says, well, do you remember what you said to me? I go, oh, no. Did I? I don't remember. And he said, oh, well, what you did is we went and had a meeting, and you had a list of things we were going to go over, and he had proposed this working with us for having X warrants. In reality, X was pretty small. And by anybody, if I told you the numbers and percentages, I mean, it was really small. And I went through, got to that item, and I said, okay, I'm willing to accept your warrant position, but I don't agree with the number. And he goes, well, what do you mean you don't agree with the number? And apparently what I told him was, I said, well, look, I think it should be 150% of X. And he said, well, when you negotiate, you usually negotiate a smaller number when you're trying to give out the warrants. I said, yeah, I'm aware, but I happen to know from talking to people that you take on about 8 new entrepreneurs a year that you spread your time across for doing this project for your firm. And I'm trying to figure out how to get on the top of that list. And if I can be, if 150%, if you thought X was good, 150% is probably better. And I want to have you fully backed so that when you're driving home at night, you're thinking about in situ. When you're coming into work in the morning, you're thinking about in situ. And he goes, I get that. Well, what he didn't tell me is he went back and told his partnership, and that was the key ingredient, so that his partnership actually invested in every round of in situ. Because they said, wow, that kind of thinking is what we like to see in our CEOs. I have another example where I remember there's a colleague of mine at NASA that had just got promoted to this job, and there was 7 program managers. And it seems like they're always fighting over who was going to get 51% of a deal. In fact, they spent more time doing that than trying to win the deal. And what his strategy was is to go to one of the guys and cut a deal on a future project that they would do together and advocate to NASA headquarters, and he gave up 60% and he'd only get 40%. So that guy agreed to the deal, went around and bragged to the other people that he had totally outmaneuvered that guy and got 60% and 40%. So then there was a line of people out of that office wanting to sign up similar deals for other projects. At the end of the year, that person had 6 deals of 40%. Each of the other people had 1 deal of 60%. And so when he got promoted to be their boss the next year, he was able to explain to them that there was a different way of doing business and how to collaborate. So anyway, I'm a big believer that you need to figure out how to make R big, and that's more important than trying to figure out how to keep the angle that you give up small. Okay, last leadership hint is this one is a set of global vision versus tactical execution, and it comes from my aerospace background. And yes, I am a rocket scientist, but I'm trying to prove that it is something valuable to have a rocket scientist around. So, turns out I learned about this even before I got to Professor Bryson. Professor Bryson was my thesis advisor at Stanford, but I heard of this when I was an undergrad. And that was that the F-4 had come out, and the Navy wanted to set the record for the fastest time to climb for that class of jet. And the way they would do that is they would go and make a bunch of measurements at each altitude. What's the best speed you could possibly fly? They go to 1,000 feet, they do 2,000 feet, they do 3, and it takes a long time because they have to fly all the different speeds at each one. Multiple missions. It costs a lot of money to generate that data. And so Professor Bryson said, well, I can help you optimize that. And they said, well, great, you might be able to save us some money. So instead of having to get that data every 1,000 feet going up there to get the absolute best at each point, we can take fewer points and you can interpolate between there for us. And we could feel comfortable about that. So he went off and came back, and his thing came back and looked like this. And they said, what? Why? He said, yeah, what you do is you climb up to about 20,000 feet, 25,000 feet, and then you dive. He says, no, that doesn't make any sense. Look, we don't need one of these academic projects. You know, what we want is this one, because how can you be any better than flying the absolute best at every time? At every time along that point, you can't get any better than what that particular spot is. And the professor kept saying, no, you got to try this. You know, this will work better. And finally, just to make the young professor shut up, they got 2 airplanes out. They flipped the coin. The loser had to fly the professor's algorithm. The 2 airplanes took off, climbed up into the sky, started out exactly the same. Then the one started to dive, and boom, he shot right past them. And they're like, what? How could that happen? And then they went and studied it, and sure enough, there's something called the sonic boom. And it turns out right near the speed of sound, you have increased drag. So what you want to do is when you get close to that, you dive down through the barrier and get on the other side where you can start climbing again. And the other plane was just kind of hovering, just getting closer and closer to that, and was stuck with that. Oh, well, now that you explain it, of course that's better. Everybody knows that. So I think this has good observations for what a leader needs to do, and that is to avoid getting stuck in local optimization. I mean, it's easy to think that doing the best you can do every single day is the best. But every once in a while, you got to stop, get out of the box, take the hit, and jump onto a new curve in order to get to a new place. And trying to figure out how often to do that and when to do that, that's a key part of what a leader does in trying to figure out that pivot. And I'll use this physical example to remind me that there's things like this out there, and we need to be ready to jump on that when it's time. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap up. My newest adventure is Seek, and I think the big thing about this is that we found an area where industry is spending about $2 billion a year, and they're not happy with the information they're getting out of their data, and we're going to try and use some technologies to solve it. So basically, Seek is organized to solve an entrepreneurial need, just like you would expect. I think it won't be long before you're going to hear that I've signed up some Fortune 100 company to be our partner, and we'll work together on getting to industry, and hopefully there'll be some news on that in the future. So to conclude, I think there's nothing like the exhilaration of building a business from scratch that actually succeeds. Some of my investors point out, though, that sometimes it's difficult along the way to tell you are you really succeeding or not. It's really hard to sometimes tell until everything starts to come together. In the recent book, Outliers, Gladwell said that talent plus hard work plus being in the right place at the right time, or luck, helps you make a success outlier. And I'd like to just say to in situ, and I hope I made the case, we had some talented people. We worked really hard, but boy, we were lucky and made that work. So that's what I had for you today. Now we do the Q&A.
Okay, it's time for the Q&A. I'm sorry we don't have the microphones we normally have, but we have 15 minutes of Q&A. I will ask that when you not pontificate about all your thoughts about anything. We've had that happen in the past. Just ask a question, make it a question, not 3 paragraphs and then a question. Okay? So we have 15 minutes for Q&A. Let's go.
So they all had stock options. And
Steve, could you repeat it?
Oh, yeah.
Question?
So the question is how, I mentioned that everybody participated in the upside, and we made sure everybody was an owner through stock options. We had a standard stock option plan, we had refresh, we had bonus options. For certain employees, we had performance plans that included options. And one interesting thing is Boeing was kind of shocked by how pervasive it was through the organization. And there was one story that they tell where we were getting ready to have a 4-star come to visit, which is the highest rank, and they're really nervous about it. And they came to me and said that, are we ready? Are we going to accept that person? And the receptionist was out there, and she had, with her own money, bought some flowers, had been out there cleaning the area, went out and marked off the parking spot, was using Windex to clean the window, and he was watching this and saying, what's going on? Who told you to do this? Well, no one, but I figured, this admiral is going to be with me for about a minute 90 seconds, a minute 30 seconds or so, and I want it to be the best minute and 30 seconds he's ever had going into a new company. And it was like, I'm a part owner here. This is my part to make out where I can make a difference. And so that's what we tried to do all the way through it. I mentioned that we had people in the field, and there the hours are really long, and all the other compensation schemes that everybody else had was very much like our limits. And there were times where 12 hours were up and people went back to their things, and in situ people are still working. So I think it worked out really good. Yes?
I'm wondering if you could comment a bit. Well, first of all, great story, well told. Thank you. But if you could comment on your views on how you see the commercial UAS market developing.
So the question is on the commercial UAV market. And so I'll tell you, so I have one big concern, which is the FAA. So I have a basic rule that I use, which is go where the FAA isn't. That's why we were trying to go out over off of Alaska. But even they interfered with that, and it took us 5 years to get them on board with that program. So one of the reasons why we have an operation in Australia is to make sure that we have some flexibility to put pressure on there. Now, we ultimately gave a system to the FAA Spent a lot of time working at the technical center, spent a lot of time working with them. I testified before Congress trying to get more money to the FAA so they could do the right thing, because you can't really be negative to your regulator. So I think there's a lot of pressure. There's lawsuits, which we couldn't have done because we were already in the game, that I think are going to cause everybody to really think through this. And I think that there will be a break in the next 2 to 3 years. And then there's just so many applications. Anything that you can think of where you want to, like a video camera, just video cameras are all around inside buildings and all this sort of stuff, but being able to look at things, sense things, environmental issues, wildlife, farming, I mean, there's just so many different things that can be done that they have there. Now, as I was growing the business, though, one of my rules of thumb is if somebody came to me and said they wanted to do an unmanned solution because it was cheaper, I would give them the name of my competitors. I want people who are willing to pay a premium because we're doing it unmanned. And there's plenty of those applications to begin with, and those are the ones I go after in the beginning. So I think that's going to be one of the key parts in the industry to developing it, is finding those areas that are sustainable, where you can actually find the unmanned part is not just cheaper, because manning is not cheap necessarily just because it's on the ground. So back here. So, well, and by the way, we are their most successful acquisition. Our revenue grew 3x within 3 years of them buying us. So that's the best that they've ever had in an acquisition. A couple things. The most important thing is they have competition. So we had 12 serious bidders in the process, and it got down to a war between two giant behemoths, going back and forth, which we encourage them to do. So, but one cute story is we were without a CFO during that actual process. So I asked the person to kind of handle that job, and we didn't tell her until afterwards that modified EBITDA isn't really a real thing. And we gave her charts where she came up and explained the adjusted EBITDA this and the adjusted EBITDA that, and she did it with such flourish. And it was at the party when we were celebrating afterwards that we confessed to her that adjusted EBITDA really isn't something that people like to get up there and talk about. But anyway, it came out to be a pretty nice record. And I think the competition is the most important part. The reason why we went then is that we had actually started doing new devices, and we were willing to partner with companies other than Boeing. So Boeing didn't want to have us outside the family, so that caused the issue. So then I said, well, we have investors, so we can't just do a closed auction. We got to do it. We got to open the auction up. So, yep.
I've heard other, particularly European countries, have adopted UAVs legislatively, or just their countries have adopted them quicker. Is there any lessons that we can learn from them?
So in some ways, Europe is ahead, but in other ways, they aren't. Traffic is a little bit more challenging there. Some of the rules that they've adopted are ones that they've adopted rules, but none of us can fly to them. So for those of you who aren't in the space, one of the fundamental things in aviation is something called see and avoid. And what the final thing comes down to is the pilot has to see a potential collision and avoid it. And all the systems are designed around that. And UAVs, on the other hand, know their position within centimeters, and we can tell everybody what our position is. And that would be superior than see and avoid, because see and avoid, they can show it only works about 20% of the time. And so, but unfortunately, because that's the way the system was designed, there's still a lot of people that aren't in the system. For example, a farmer has a Super Cub with no electrical system and can't report its position. Therefore, we have to create a thing that's see and avoid, which is really hard for a 20-pound UAV to build a sensor that would mimic the human vision system. So trying to get around that. So the Europeans have adopted kind of a see and avoid kind of approach, and it has a chance of working with the big predators and stuff, but probably isn't going to work in some of these other commercial areas. So ultimately, what's going to happen is there's something called ADS-B, which is a way where every airplane can report their position. And they expect that sometime after 2020 that most airplanes are going to have that, and in which case now you have a good time to be able to maneuver around traffic and things. The way we tried to do it is with radar systems on the ground radar that would see the airplanes and see the UAV and deconflict them while you're over here. And that's one of the things we were working with the FAA for research on. Yes?
Tell me about the development of the capture procedure and what your success rate on that was, because it seems that it would be critical in order to gather information that you have to retrieve that UAV. Is that an automated process, or is that a remote pilot that's flying out?
So it ultimately was totally automated. And the cool thing about it is when we're doing the test, we put the hook out there with the GPS device, and we take the rope off, and the airplane goes in. There's no rope, so it goes around and goes in there. So the way we had it designed is it would go up there, and it'd be hold, and you say land, and it would hold there. And on the ship, there would be a push the land button. And so you'd put a safety officer out there, and you would push the button down, and the airplane would circle down and come in for a landing. And if there's any time that you didn't like the landing, you let go of the button, and the airplane would go back up and go up and hold and wait. So when it came time to getting certified for the Navy, it was like certifying the button, right? So they just had to observe. Now, ultimately, they got so confident in the UAV, they didn't even pull the button out anymore. But that's part. You have to go through that process of getting people used to it and comfortable with it. In general, we had a very high percentage recovery for the class of systems. I would say 99%. And just to reiterate another point, is all the data that we delivered, almost all the data we delivered was done real time. So there was no data kept on the UAV. So it's all being radioed back. So it's not needed for capturing the data. It's for saving the cost of replacing the UAV. Yes.
So what do you think of the FAA's 333 exemptions for capturing data for the industry versus the test ranges?
So I think the test ranges are a good idea, and I'm really glad that we're going to have access to one here, and I think that's a huge competitive advantage. The difficulty is that like what I'm talking about is the FAA currently has a rule that you can't make money using UAVs. Like, where did that come from? I talked to the person. How did you think of that? Where did that come from? And so those are the things that they're trying to deal with. So I think the test ranges, the FAA feel comfortable with it. They've got a COA system that's kind of working. But by the way a COA system works, since I'm no longer in the space I can complain about it, is that only a government can hold a COA, because obviously only the government's entitled to fly a UAV. Where did that come from? It's like, who said that the government's the only one allowed to fly a UAV? Who gave the FAA the authority to do that? So.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could comment on how to create business models around big data and all the sensors. Kind of hinted on in your talk, but I was wondering where you see the future of the industry going.
So, which industry are you thinking?
The big data industry, I guess, is getting more to your seat.
Okay, Seek. So big data is a huge area, and it's a set of technologies. And the area that Seek is in a very narrow corner of it, where we're addressing huge amounts of sensor data in industry. As an example, in a modern refinery, you might have 150,000 sensors that they collect data about once a second, stored in something called a historian for 10 years, and want to use that to be able to improve operations. The problem is that the data is not very accessible and easy to use, and you have to be a highly trained engineer to be able to use those tools, so business people can't really extract the information they need. And our claim is that the new technologies that come out of the big data world that were developed by Google and Facebook and Twitter and all these guys can really be addressable here. So I put together a team that has some industry experts from these kinds of industries, some big data experts, and some software product guys, and we're going after that, and it looks really promising. Yep.
Can you give us a little insight on where security encryption technology exists right now for UAVs so that people like Iran can't claim to have actually brought it down?
Well, I just laugh whenever I see all that stuff. I don't believe there was an encryption invasion. I just believe that it was a lost UAV. I mean, they've had our UAV out there. But look, what we see are a lot of parts we don't recognize. So we figure it was some sort of crash or something. And they've actually had our UAV, like in a parade, where they've had a couple of them going over there, but they look remarkably like, paper mache, things. So I wouldn't believe a lot of that stuff. So one of the issues they bring up is like spoofing the GPS, okay? Well, the GPS, we're constantly being attacked from GPS, and we're constantly having to recover from that. And the amount of energy that you would have to put and the number of sites that you would have to put to totally spoof the GPS and make it think that it was someplace else for a long enough time that our system wouldn't get out of that, I just don't have confidence in that right now. I know some people have done some experiments where they've shown it in a very limited case. And like if we were getting ready to land and right in that area, they could really make it rough on us for landing. But we have ways of detecting that, and we just manually do it then. I jokingly say that our compressed data code is so confusing that if we give you the manual and it would take you 90 days to understand it before you would be able to do it. So it's just hard for me to understand how that would happen from that. Now, that being said, most of the military systems do have a type of encryption, and that's as the systems get bigger and heavier, that's probably a good thing. And the military encryption is pretty solid. I don't believe those have been pursued through. One thing I'll say is that our video, though, are pretty standard video transmitters. So if you knew where we were and could point an antenna at us and you could figure out what channel we were on, you could probably get the video for a few minutes while we're doing that and then make a story about it. But up here. So the first thing we did is we formed the Gorge Technology Association so that when we had critical people that we could network and say, hey, I'm trying to get this robotics engineer who has a spouse that's in accounting. I don't need any accounting right now. Does anybody else need any accounting? Because that would be really helpful to me. And then I'll take one for you sometime if the time comes up. So that was one way that we did it. Another way that we solved it is, truthfully, some remote aspects is that we actually put a building in Vancouver, Washington, and for certain key areas, it was hard to recruit into the Gorge. For example, accounting. And one of the reasons for that is accountants are pretty comfortable doing toothpaste, deodorant, robotic airplanes. It's all the same to them. Whereas for an engineer, that's a big difference. So we would get over the hump on that with respect to the family. So we ended up creating a little space where we could have a little accounting hub. And then we actually had extra space there so the few technical people that took them the time to move to the Gorge, they would actually come to the long commute to the Gorge like 3 days a week, and then they could do like Monday and Friday at the Vancouver location. So we kind of did like a hybrid solution like that. Then ultimately we got big enough, as I said, so that we could try to solve our own problem. So my new business, I'm doing it virtual, and we have these tools that are pretty interesting where there's a representation of an office layout, and we knock on each other's doors, we have water cooler talks, we have conference rooms, creates a lot of casual talk, automatically puts together like a video and sharing screens and all of that, and I'm giving that the old college try, and right now I'm happy with it. So, any other questions? Okay, well, I think I did the execute part. Got done in time for lunch.